President Trump publicly criticized the Pope, calling him terrible. Over the past 72 hours, President Trump has criticized and attacked Pope Leo XIV 6 times. Today, let's take a closer look at this issue. Let's look now. On April 12th, President Trump posted on Truth Social saying he doesn't want a pope who supports Iran having nuclear weapons, and called the Pope weak on crime and terrible on foreign policy. He said that given their relationship, the church chose him only because he is American, and Leo wasn't even considered for papal candidacy. He added Leo should be grateful. He wrote that if he weren't in the White House, Leo wouldn't be in the Vatican. And later, he continued to attack Pope Leo XIV, saying that as Pope, Leo should faithfully fulfill his duties, act with common sense, stop pandering to the radical left, and focus on being a great pope, not a politician. The United States rarely targets religious leaders with such direct criticism. President Trump spoke out after the Pope criticized his administration over the Middle East war. On April 11, when the peace negotiations between the United States and Iran were underway, the Pope said during a special prayer at St. Peter's Basilica that God does not bless any war, and even less blesses those who drop bombs. Although he did not specifically mention anyone, the context clearly shows that his words were aimed at President Trump. As a result, an exchange of words between the Pope and President Trump followed. This time, the Vatican pointed at the United States by stating that a democratic nation can only remain sound when it is rooted in moral values. They warned that without this foundation, democracy could become majority tyranny or a facade for rule by economic and technological elites. They also stated that, according to the teachings of the Catholic Church, power itself should not become the goal, but rather power should be a means toward the common good. This wasn't directly aimed at the United States, but many foreign media see it as part of the conflict with President Trump. J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President, told a conservative group in Georgia that just as the Vice President is careful discussing policy, the Pope should be equally cautious when addressing theological matters. The conflict between the Pope and President Trump continues. In the international community, it seems that there are more people criticizing President Trump. It's rare for the President of the United States and the Pope to argue. In the past, people would usually show some acceptance even if a religious leader said something unpleasant. However, President Trump immediately launched a direct attack on the Pope, which caused quite a stir. Criticizing the Pope is not unprecedented in history, though. People have criticized the Pope or the Vatican since the 20th century. For example, in the case of President Maduro of Venezuela, when the Vatican criticized the Venezuelan government, he called the Vatican venomous bureaucrats and accused the Pope of being used by right-wing conspiracy theorists. Also, in the case of Adolf Hitler of Nazi Germany, when the Vatican criticized the Nazis, Hitler called the Pope a reactionary and even made plans to kidnap the Pope. Also, in the case of Stalin of the Soviet Union, he pressured the Vatican by famously saying, "How many divisions does the Pope have?" In fact, this was a very unusual thing. It seems that the international community is criticizing President Trump. First of all, Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, targeted President Trump's criticism of the Pope and said it was unacceptable. She defended the Vatican and criticized President Trump, saying that it is right and normal for the Pope to call for peace and condemn war. In response, President Trump said about Prime Minister Meloni that she wouldn't care even if Iran had nuclear weapons and could wipe out Italy in 2 minutes if given the chance. Within the United States, this controversy is spreading much more than expected. President Donald Trump won the last election with significant support from Catholic voters. In particular, white Catholic conservatives have played a decisive role in swing states, and their votes have influenced the outcome of the elections. But this recent remark is being seen as something that directly antagonized that core support base. The impact is even greater because the other party involved is Pope Leo XIII. Because the Pope is not a politician, but the spiritual leader of Catholics worldwide, an attack on the Pope can be perceived as an attack on the faith itself. The atmosphere in the United States is rapidly deteriorating right now. Discontent is rising in the Catholic community, including conservative bishops and Republican-leaning Trump supporters showing signs of division. According to a report by the New York Times, a significant number of Catholic voters who have supported the Republican Party are reacting to this remark as being insulting. This isn't just a small change in opinion, it's seen as Trump's core supporters being shaken. The timing is critical with the US nearing midterm elections. This is the time when consolidating the support base is most important, but instead, internal cracks are appearing. For the Republican Party, there is now a possibility of losing votes in what should be their most secure stronghold. Their changing voting intentions could hurt the party's image and result in seat losses, causing a sense of crisis within the party. Some Republican figures think these remarks have caused unnecessary conflict and worry this could pose a serious election strategy risk. Some analysts say voters with strong religious identities may see this issue as a personal insult, potentially causing a rift that's hard to fix soon. In the end, the current situation can be seen as a test where a single remark has the potential to shake the entire political foundation. At this point, there is a scene that completely turns the situation around. This is an image that President Donald Trump posted on his social media. In this image, Trump is depicted as a figure similar to Jesus. He looks like he has healed the economy, with light shining down and a symbolic atmosphere. This scene clearly conveys a religious message. The problem is that this didn't end with just a single image. The post sparked explosive controversy as soon as it was uploaded, and there was immediate backlash from within religious circles. Importantly, the conservative Christian community also criticized it. Normally, one of Trump's strongest support bases is the conservative Christian group, but even they started to react by saying he had crossed the line. Some religious leaders publicly pointed out that using a sacred figure for political purposes is unacceptable, and they strongly opposed using faith as a tool of political propaganda. Religion is considered an absolute value, not just a matter of support or opposition, which makes this dangerous. People may tolerate political criticism, but once something is seen as an insult to faith, everything changes, especially given the timing. Since this occurred immediately after harsh criticism of Leo XIV, the image began to be seen as an intentional message rather than a simple mistake. In other words, a trend was created where the Pope was attacked while at the same time elevating himself as a religious symbol. At this point, the frame of blasphemy really starts to take effect. Because American society is structured with a very strong religious influence, once this frame is formed, it spreads beyond the political sphere and throughout society as a whole. Online, many say the line between politics and religion has been crossed, with some calling it an attempt at deification. This one scene has changed the controversy from a dispute between a political and a religious leader to the appearance of political power encroaching on religion. There's something we need to highlight here. The question is whether this is simply an emotional remark or a calculated political move. Some political commentators say first, reviewing President Donald Trump's actions, it's said he often rallies supporters with controversial comments. Even when criticized, he seems to use this approach to further unite his hardline base. Some also interpret this attack in the same context. Many analysts note this time is different because the opponent is Pope Leo XIV, not a politician. Since religion is not just an ideology, but an area directly connected to identity, there is also a possibility that this could lead not to the consolidation of supporters, but to their departure. For Catholics, who see the Pope as both a leader and faith symbol, this clash may be seen not as political, but as an attack on their religion. The structure of American society deserves more focus. While politics and religion seem separate in the US, religious affiliation actually plays a key role in elections. Not only in presidential elections, but also in midterm elections, the movements of religious voters often change the outcome. In this situation, a direct confrontation with a religious leader becomes more than just a controversy. It can become a factor that could shake the entire political landscape. The scenarios going forward are also very important. If this conflict continues to escalate, there is a real possibility that Catholic voters will start to leave. And additional cracks may also appear in relations with Europe. Since Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has publicly opposed it, if this trend spreads, it could impact Western Bloc unity. And finally, this is the key point. This conflict is growing beyond politics, revealing how power and faith can collide. Until now, these were areas where both sides respected boundaries, but with this incident, it seems those lines are starting to break down. If this trend continues, there may be unforeseen effects in American politics and the global order. President Trump is continuing his harsh criticism of the Pope. We'll have to wait and see how these repercussions unfold.